Welcome the Budget Committee members and the public thank you for joining us tonight. On the agenda is now time for for the Budget Committee to resume its budget deliberations and ask any questions that we may have. Before considering approval of the budget, we have the responsibility to determine the local option levy rate and the option levy rate to be imposed. Additional information on the local option levy rate, limits, levy rates imposed, and the effect of the tax compression on local option levy amount has been handed out tonight. We're going to open the floor to discussion, and we're going to have Bill Newton and Mark walk us through the questions document that we received via email and get that initial presentation.
Sounds good. Thank you, Janice. Yeah, so I asked if I could do a quick statement to everyone here tonight. And then, as Janice just alluded to, we do have some questions that were answered in the FAQ that was shared to our Budget Committee members, as well as it's been posted online. But there are also some topics that we wanted to just have share a response orally with you and have a conversation with you about. And so I just want to start by thanking everyone for participating in this conversation. It's not an easy conversation. We all understand that, but a really important one. So a couple of things. I just want to kind of set the table here. So the last couple of years have been difficult when addressing the budget shortfalls we have faced. So for the 2023-24 school year, the school board approved a $2 million transfer from the biennial reserve fund rather than making reductions at that time due to pressing needs following the pandemic. Despite this transfer, the ending fund balance at the end of the school year was 3.33%, short of our 5% target as required by board policy. Then for the 2024-25 school year, our school district made reductions in FTE for classified, licensed, and administrative staff, beginning the work of right-sizing our budget and aligning our expenditures with our revenue. We recognize this is ongoing, continuous work. For the 2025-26 school year, this school year, our school district made reductions of over $4 million to balance our budget, primarily in response to increasing PERS costs and declining enrollment. And then for this upcoming school year, we are again facing budget reductions to keep pace with PERS costs and declining enrollment. But I also want to add that there is an element to this consideration that we can't ignore, and that is the cost of upkeep of our aging facilities, which has become apparent through our work with the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee. The work we do every year during budget season is really difficult because it impacts our students, the services we provide, and the staff we work alongside. No one takes this work lightly. The process we follow is centered on an equity lens decision-making and long-term sustainability. While I know many of you are hearing concerns as a result of these proposed budget reductions, I want this committee to understand that the proposals are not made in a silo. We have focused on hearing the voice of our community, including all of its reaches. And this includes starting at the beginning of the year with our Finance Advisory Committee meetings that occur monthly to keep our community updated. It includes our strategic planning sessions that occurred at our schools with staff and parents. It includes our core value surveys, which are provided twice a year to gather feedback from students, staff, and families. It includes our budget updates, which are included in our board meetings throughout the year. And then our cabinet team has met frequently with our administrators to solicit feedback and input as this budget was developed. The budget, as proposed, was impacted by this feedback. And so some other considerations that were considered, and this is kind of Matt getting at your question with option B, it includes considering increasing class size. So staff and parents have made it clear that they want to continue to see small class sizes, which is why we haven't gone that direction this coming school year. Even with FTE reductions we made here at HRVHS for next school year, which was 2 licensed positions due to declining enrollment, we are hearing of concerns with not being able to provide the level of offerings for English language arts and science as we have been accustomed to. Nor are we able to increase our CTE offerings at this time, despite knowing the positive impacts these programs have on our students. Another consideration is decreasing our student support specialists and counselor positions. So we continue to hear the need for social emotional support with our students. That increased behaviors and heightened anxiety is continuing to be a challenge. We've heard about assistant principal positions. So following the logic of our student support specialists and counseling support, these roles bolster campus safety, manage behavioral trends and day-to-day issues that arise, freeing principals to focus on educational leadership instead of operational management. As a former principal, when you are managing, say, 50 staff, if you are the only person doing that, you're responsible for supervision, evaluation, and what have you. It's really difficult to do. Having an assistant principal allows you to be a leader versus just managing all the time. We also have in the past considered school days. This is no longer an option after Governor Kotek's executive order. That is not a possibility now. And then middle school athletics. We've been down this road before in our school district. What we have come to recognize is the importance of extracurricular activities for students now more than ever. In addition, when we cut extracurricular activities, it means our students from poverty and without the means and access to participate in club sports are less likely to participate. And then another consideration is busing within the 1.5-mile radius. So while transportation within this radius is not mandatory, we prioritize student safety, particularly in areas lacking sidewalks or requiring busy road crossings. Furthermore, we recognize that reliable transport is essential for maintaining consistent student attendance. So while we may need to consider these as possible reductions in the future, we are not at this time recommending these for next school year. And I just want to conclude that by stating that while this process becomes more arduous each year, it also clarifies our purpose. Our choices are difficult because our standards for our students are high. This budget represents more than just a balance of revenue and expenditures. It represents our commitment to remain fiscally stable so that we can keep our focus where it belongs, on the success and well-being of every student in our classrooms. And again, I just want to thank you for your partnership in this work. Mark and I, what we'd like to be able to do, there were 5 topics that we didn't get at in the FAQ, and those topics were Pine Grove and the EIECSE program, Cascade Locks Elementary, general fund and reserve strategies, transportation and maintenance, and student programming. So what we'd like to be able to do is take some time to be able to respond to the questions that were shared with us by budget committee members around these topics. We'll provide a response, and then at the end of each of these topics, then we would like to be able to have a conversation, ask clarifying questions and so forth before we then move on to the next topic. When we're done with all 5 of those, then open it up and we'll see where we go, okay? All right, so the first one is Pine Grove and early intervention, and so I'm just gonna read some of the questions and provide a response. So from public comment, community members who spoke out against the Pine Grove transition felt they were heavily involved in the initial transition but have not been privy to this new proposal. Do you have insight into how they were involved previously and why this same process was not used this go-around? And I know this happened back in 2011. I've actually heard from some people saying it actually occurred pretty quickly. I will say, as we are looking at it for this year, I have had conversations with Ann Carlos, who is the person who supervises the EIECSE program. I've also had a conversation with the coordinator for the program. I've also met with the staff from the EIECSE group, and I would say those are initial conversations. As I've alluded to in previous statements, we recognize that there is a lot of work that needs to happen in order to be able to make this a successful transition to Mid-Valley Elementary. I also want to recognize the community's history with Pine Grove. That school has been around for a long time and means a lot to a lot of people in this community. I also want to recognize the important work of our EIECSE staff and the tremendous work that they do supporting some of our most marginalized students and families in our community. That cannot be, understated. I also want to say that we are committed to a thoughtful transition process involving facilities experts like Winnaha Group and OPSIS. Okay. Another question here was, or statement was, early intervention is commonly conducted at preschools, daycares, and in the child's home. Do you have numbers on the number of kids actually seen on site? Why is an entire building needed to run a program of seemingly equal or less volume than other clinics? So in my conversations, like with Ann Carlos, we know that EIECSE screens over the course of a school year around 150 to 200 students. During the course of, a period of time, you may have 2 to 3 families with a child at the school at Pine Grove receiving support. And then in addition to that, there is also therapy that occurs on site. It occurs in preschools. It occurs in homes. I just want to also say that we do not require a standalone building for this program. Moving the program to Mid-Valley uses existing renovated spaces more efficiently. So back in 2016, the space underneath the gym, the old gym at Mid-Valley Elementary, was actually remodeled. You have a remodeled library there as well as office space. And this is the space that we are considering for the move. There was a question around the future of Pine Grove. So what is the plan or options for the Pine Grove School once EIECSE is moved to Mid-Valley? Will the building be sold or used for something else? Is it a liability at that point or an asset? And so I would say while there is no immediate plan to sell or repurpose the building, this will be a primary focus for the school board and our long-range facilities planning committee. Our priority is ensuring that funds are directed toward educators and instructional time rather than maintaining square footage across our school district that can be costly. Okay. And then there was a question around relocation. So can the district delay the planned facilities move or reorganization? This includes consideration for EIECSE needs, architectural reviews, and necessary changes at Mid-Valley Elementary School. And so I want to restate that we are being intentional about this transition by partnering with experts like the Winnaha Group and Opsis Architecture. Alongside our staff, we are ensuring that the move is professionally managed and that the facilities at Mid-Valley Elementary meet the needs of early intervention, early childhood special education program. Every dollar we spend maintaining a building like Pine Grove is a dollar we cannot spend on qualified educators, support staff, instructional time, and quality student programming. We are choosing to invest in people and programs rather than bricks and mortar. This move is also about improving the student and family experience. So centralizing these services fosters stronger partnership between families and the school district, streamlining access to support and creating a more cohesive learning and developmental path for our youngest learners. So at Mid-Valley Elementary, we will have a new preschool promise school classroom, as well as continuing to have a Head Start preschool class. While we hear the request for delays, we must weigh that against the fiscal reality. Delaying the reorganization maintains a higher cost on facilities, which directly impacts our ability to balance this year's budget without cutting deeper into other instructional and student support services and programs. And I'll just end by saying that our focus is on creating a sustainable future by integrating these programs into our renovated spaces now. We protect the general fund for its most important purpose, the educators and programs that happen inside the classroom. Okay, so I would say that is our initial response, and so again, I just want to open it up to questions around Pine Grove EIECSE program before we then move into the next topic, which is Cascade Locks Elementary.
I mean, so there's one that brought this up, but I mean, I still feel like, we've talked about these things before, and it's not that I, again, don't understand the need for moving. I just, I guess in my thought processes, like, and how being on the board and knowing how long it takes to do things, and the fact that we haven't actually gotten even a quote from Winnaha Group yet. They haven't, like, haven't met with anybody. All of that would have to be done, and then kind of all the changes would have to happen to Mid-Valley.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't see that happening. Certainly not in the summer,
Yeah.
and into next year.
Yeah.
And so when we look at a savings on our like kind of on the budget, I don't see how we get that savings if we're not doing that really
Yeah.
through most of the year. Like, so that's my kind of thing with it. It's not that I disagree with the fact that we need to make the move.
Yeah.
I do want the move like done with a lot of care, and I think that will happen.
Yep.
I'm not worried about that in most senses. It is just that I have trouble with saying we're going to save this money and put it in a box of savings when we haven't really talked about how much exactly we are going to spend in that whole process, and where that kind of comes into the budget specifically. And then also when, I mean, it's like, if it's $138,000, but it's all like prefaced on these things happening, which I have trouble believing are going to happen like quickly.
Yeah.
So it seems like sort of a weird thing to me, and I understand also. So that's my first thing. My second one is that I understand where we would have to take away from something else, but we did add things that we have not had before. So we did add a $500,000 staffing contingency, and I understand again the reasoning beyond that. But we haven't had that much in staffing contingency, and yet we've still had to make staffing changes as the year goes along.
Yeah.
And we do that through other ways, because as Mark has told us many, many times, this is a plan, not an actuality, right? Like, so things change as the school year goes on. And so you don't necessarily have to take those things away and when we have other things that we have added. So that's, from my standpoint, like, I guess that's my thought process of just being realistic about when this would happen. And is saying that this budget is really going to happen this year. And you could argue that, like, we're just putting a pot of money whatever place, and I understand that. But I think if we just argue that, then we're not listening to what the community's saying about it. So that is my.
Yeah. You're right, Corinna. We do have additions. The staffing contingency isn't new, though. We did have it in place this year, $500,000 that we spent this fall for teaching positions, classified positions, and what have you. So it is something that and I would even say, like the year prior, we didn't have a staffing contingency, yet we still dipped into our reserves in order to be able to pay for people to support needs and challenges that arrived, at our doorstep at the beginning of the school year. In regards to why now versus later, I think you've heard the message, what happened this winter at Pine Grove with the flooding and what have you, and how insurance is covering the repairs. In order to avoid that from occurring again, though, we are going to need to invest more money into Pine Grove Elementary, such as drainage, plumbing, and so forth, in order to avoid that from occurring again. And so the impetus is more around, let's get moving on this so we can avoid costs there and actually put the cost towards improving a place at Mid-Valley for EIECSE.
So for my part, I guess I'd just like a chance to say, a couple of things. For one thing, I'm really glad to hear when AHA and OPSIS are involved. Those are the companies that took care of our 2016 bond, and basically every improvement and thing you see around the district was done with AHA and OPSIS design and engineering oversight, ranging from the May Street Elementary to any improvement you saw around the district then. So involving them tells me that there's an intention to do this right, if you will. It will be a quality project. I don't know if we know that everybody moves on September 1 or October 15th. We probably don't know that right now. We don't have an approved budget to involve those companies and get that rolling. But getting that started and involving those companies gives me confidence it'll be done well. The other part is I toured Mid-Valley and looked at where this is going on. Because I can't remember every building and every room in every school. But anyways, for me to see the upstairs gymnasium, which was fully renovated and seismically retrofitted in 2016 as part of that bond and a seismic grant from the state, that's a really nice facility. Lots of open natural light, windows, new flooring, paint job. At the time, it was one of our kind of highlight projects. And then again, downstairs, the office, small classroom options have been renovated, the library with 2 exterior doors that right now are nothing special to look at, but I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, you know, obviously that can be painted, decorated into like a welcoming entry kind of area. So I'm just encouraged to hear they're involved, and it's a quality space. It's not a dark hole in a corner or something.
You know,
That's
it
what I got
is,
to say.
it is a welcoming space. Mid-Valley is a welcoming space for our students.
So I do have a question, kind of as follow-on to both of their comments. If, assuming the budget passes as is today, when is that funding available to be able to start that process? So we're not just up against a crazy deadline of having to scramble. Is it available tomorrow so that people can start working that, or do we have to wait until a certain date?
We have an existing contract for long-range facilities planning, and so I would initiate the work under that vehicle, and then we would need to add appropriation to it next year as we complete the work, because obviously their scope would increase. But as part of that process, they've talked to us about doing some analysis. Steve Nelson, who probably knows more about our buildings than anybody in the district, he is an encyclopedic brain of our district buildings over there. And so he's very familiar with all those spaces.
Have we gotten any sort of idea as far as how long that process will take once they start to make renovations or do their changes to the facility at Mid-Valley?
No.
No, that would depend on the scope of the changes. I think, as Bill talked about and Rich talked about, those spaces were renovated in 2016. They weren't specifically purposed in 2016. And so what you have are classroom spaces that are not greatly dissimilar to other classroom spaces you'd expect to see in other places. There's a lot of stuff in there that just has to be moved out. And then we can evaluate how best to put, like if we're picking office space for employees, then how do we put up, employees in those spaces? What area do we designate for like clinic and classroom OT/PT and things like that? You can kind of rough it out on a map and you can sort of look at it, but obviously that's a process. Shouldn't take too long to go through it. However, it's a function of reaching consensus with all the people involved, so.
So my question is, I guess there's a lot of questions going on with the move with Pine Grove. If and so that move happens, like the Pine Grove, there's uncertainty of what's going to happen to that building. Is it going to be vacant? Is it the cost of just keeping it vacant? Will insurance insure it a vacant building? Just a lot of unknowns, dates, and how the move is happening.
Yep, there are some unknowns there, Monica, and so
Very
those would be
much.
conversations that we would engage with our long-range facilities planning as well as the school board as far as what do we want to do with Pine Grove. Back in 2011, when HRCSD moved from Frankton to Pine Grove, the school district sat on that property for quite some time before it was eventually sold. Not saying that's what we do here, because it does become a liability at some point in time if you just continue to sit on, a piece of property that you aren't using. So it's a conversation that we need to have.
What have those conversations been? I mean, in the 4 months since it flooded?
As far as like what to do with Pine Grove?
This long range, this sort of amorphous thing that, it's sort of unfortunately a near-term thing.
Yeah. In all honesty, there hasn't been a whole lot, Matt. I have had someone that has expressed interest in purchasing the property, and I've told them that it's not for sale at this point in time. And so it's we really haven't engaged or gone down that road yet.
Well, it sounds like, that's an asset then. Back to that question, is an asset or liability? That's good news to start, I suppose.
Yep.
Well, one of the things about the Pine Grove property is that it does have that deed restriction on it for being used for public school purposes. Were you able to pull the 2011 clarification on that?
Yeah, so back in, I want to say 2016, The superintendent at the time, Dan Goldman, enlisted an attorney in order to be able to do some legwork on those deeds. And so there's 3 deeds to that property, and 2 of them are free and clear of the school districts. The one that is not was deeded to the school district. However, back in 1978, there was legislation that was passed that basically said it needed to be, what's it, residual clause, that someone needed to come forward and say that they wanted to continue to have that deed as is, and that never happened. And as a result, because of that legislative law that was put in place in 1978, we actually have the rights to that property to do as we please.
I will say too, Matthew, Matt, just Matt. You know, this conversation has been going on since 2015, since I've been on the board. I mean, we're now having this conversation about Pine Grove specifically, but ever since I've been on the board, we have talked about all of our buildings and, you know, the age of them, what ones are useful, you know, the property we own on May Street. So even though this conversation, you know, is being precipitated by factors like decreasing enrollment, the age of the building, some of the issues that happened this winter, having space at other facilities, this conversation about our facilities has been going on for a long time. We just, you know, we talked about it in 2015 before we passed that bond. And I mean, we had a list of $200 million of things that we needed to, renovations we needed to make to every building, Pine Grove included. And, you know, we got to an eighth of those, a fourth of those or whatever. So they're not totally new conversations. We've known that we have had aging buildings and that we needed to do something about a lot of them for a long time.
That's difficult. Is this the last remaining school district program at Pine Grove? I mean, I know like Blossoms is there, for example, but I mean, this would be it in terms of the school district.
Yes.
Okay, so is there potential to contract out any of this space to anyone else, or somehow?
So the idea is with the 2 preschools or daycares that we offer at Pine Grove is to relocate them to different places in our school district, at different schools.
Okay. So just closing down Pine Grove ultimately?
The sentiment is if we continue to have people using it, that we need to then provide the upkeep for it.
You need to do that, the drainage, the flooding, or the plumbing and stuff that you mentioned.
Ed?
Yeah, so in that upkeep bill, how much of that upkeep is going to be able to not be used if we, you know, sort of shutter the building and no longer have facilities there? Because I've seen that bill, but I wasn't sure like what's been done, what's still to be done, what, you know, so do we have a clear picture of like the amount of savings if we avoid the, you know, if we shutter the building?
So the question there involves the risk to the programming and everything that's going on, right? Everything we experienced this winter. The cost of having to fix drainage, fixing septic, if you're not occupied, you're not going to have to fix septic. And so we can go through each piece. The problem is, and the list is in the budget, and you can sort of extrapolate the things you have to do, the things you don't have to do. I think the difficulty in picking what exactly we do with Pine Grove ultimately, it kind of gets to Matt's question, right? If you try to lease it out, who are the potential leaseholders? Are they public partners? Are they private entities? Does it make sense for us to maintain a building and try to be property manager versus selling versus try to hold on to it and see what happens? And so all of those decisions get wrapped in. Obviously, if you have a roof, you don't want the roof leaking. But all of the repairs and all of the changes, I'm not as concerned about a boiler going out in the gym if I'm not using it for programming. And so we have to take that into account. I think the biggest struggle right now is with the predominant leaseholder being the grant, not able to pay rent, not able to pay utilities. We're just left in an exposed position. And so we're having to maintain it to a high standard, but we have to draw from other places in the district to do it.
So all that repair cost, all that's, we've already had to pay that bill. It's not that we're,
So the repair bill covers, remember, insurance will cover the damages, but it doesn't cover the initial cause. We've had plumbers out there, got a rather nice detailed email describing how the pipes were built and buried into the concrete, why we think the septic is failing, why we think the drainage is failing. When you talk about estimates, the one thing I get out of everybody, including the plumber, is I can't give you a number. It could be 25,000, it could be 125,000 or more. And it's because we don't know. We don't have drawings of some of this stuff. It's so old. The one thing they'll say is, hire a hydrologist to come out and look at groundwater. That'll be a $10,000 study to try to figure out what drainage patterns need to look like with groundwater changing over 75 years. And so those are the difficulties in that.
So why aren't we selling the building?
I guess, oh, sorry.
I was going to say, I really do, after kind of hearing everything, agree with Rich a lot on, I think that having Winnaha being involved in this, I feel like you guys have done a lot of research, a lot of, taking a lot of time with the budget and trying to figure out what the best plan is. And I know reductions are hard across the board, and trying to figure out where the best place to put those is. And it seems like this with Pine Grove does really make the most sense. And as far as timing, I think, getting on that as soon as possible, to try to get things done so that we can start a successful school year with them in a new location at Mid-Valley.
Yeah, and I do want to say, I don't know if that's going to be feasible, like start the new school year. This is going to take time for us to do this right and do this well. And so I just want to put that out there. And as I've shared before, the HRCSD program is a year-round program. They don't have a summer break or what have you, so it's important for us to recognize that.
Well, it seemed like a lot of the concerns in the public comments was about the schedule and the timing. Were you able to pull when some of these initial conversations happened? Like, when did the staff get notified that this was even a possibility?
I had an initial conversation with Ann Carlos and the coordinator in March. Then I met with the staff in April. But they were also informed prior to me meeting with them. And then since that time, I've also had a follow-up walkthrough at Mid-Valley with not only Kim Yasui, but also with Ann Carlos to take a look at the space. So, but there's a lot more conversations that need to occur in order to be able to make sure that this is a successful transition.
So with that transition effort, I know you asked about timeline. My question is more about timeline going forward. So is there, again, assuming the budget passes as is there like a drop dead date where we're supposed to have Pine Grove vacated, or we need to implement additional, building maintenance there in order to facilitate keeping the programs there at Pine Grove during that transition period, or what does that look like?
No, I think you bring up a good point, Sarah. So we do, as Corinda talked about, we have a staffing contingency of $500,000. So if we're not, there by September, then we're going to be dipping into that in order to be able to continue to provide services at Pine Grove. The longer that runs, the longer, the more money that we pull out of that contingency. That is one aspect, though. I think the other aspect that I think is really important for us to keep in mind is just the cost savings with the facilities upkeep, the maintenance and what have you, because that is a really important aspect. Like Mark had shared in his presentation, over 10 years, it is going to be looking at what, according to ODE's assessment.
Oh, for Pine Grove, 2.2, I think, rough, 2. It's in the 2 range. Depends on which structures you include for upgrade and which you don't. Like, there's some on there that the covered play area you'd probably never replace, things like that. And so it just, the answer to your question about the timing of repairs, the problem is we were down 3 months doing repairs in the basement, and we had to move Blossoms to the gym, which then impacted the program. And so it snowballs, right? And so the problem becomes, if you don't start the repairs, when's it gonna rain again? And what's that gonna look like? You know, we're slated for a heavy El Nino year, I don't know. But it's become a situation where unless we get in there and start digging and figure out what we're gonna do, we run that risk. And I think that the disruption to the program was significant. We don't want to repeat that.
And I guess that's my point, is that, I mean, again, I understand the reasoning that we have all of these things in the budget. I just want us to be realistic in the sense of, and to be very forward with all the groups involved, that they would stay until these things had been done. And that might mean that we have to actually repair the plumbing and stuff if that isn't ended up being slated. So it could still be, and it might not be the full repair, right? Like it might not be as much of a repair as you would do as if you were staying for 10 years. And that is actually very, I mean, that can be a huge savings for us. And again, a reason why we want to move in the first place. But I think from my standpoint, I guess why I brought this up and why I have the most questions about it is the understanding that we will, as a district, do our best to not just work with Winnehaw and those, but with all of the impacted employees and community members, and to make the Mid-Valley really what they need. Because it is, Mid-Valley is a great space. It's just not necessarily the space that is needed for the group we're putting in it at this time. That doesn't mean it can't be, but it is going to be a process to get it there. And unfortunately, that means funds, and until that process is made, that they would be able to stay in the place they are, and that, you know, we would be making that commitment, and that we do have that money in our budget. I guess that's my thing, is that I want everybody to realize that, like, just because we are budgeting this in this way doesn't necessarily mean that we wouldn't be able to continue this program in their space until
We're ready. Mind if we move on to the next topic, Cascade Locks, and then we'll circle back after we get through the other 4 topics. Okay. So there was a question, and that is there any financial analysis looking at the potential to close Cascade Locks Elementary School now or in the immediate future, rather than a death by 1,000 cuts approach? So my statement here is we are committed to the success of Cascade Locks Elementary. We continue to invest in Cascade Locks Elementary at a higher per pupil proportion than any other school in our school district. While this gap has narrowed this year, it is important to understand the structural reality. This balance is currently sustained by specific remote school funding. Without that targeted state support, the cost per pupil would be significantly higher than our school district average. As we listen to the community's desire for more, we must find balance with the long-term challenge of rising costs and an aging facility to ensure we are building sustainable, quality future for Cascade Locks students. There was a question around consolidations. What would be the cost of impact of busing those kids, our students, to Hood River, and is there a capacity at the remaining 4 elementary schools? Would the district as a whole be better off by simply saving the $1.21 million now and moving forward? So our response is Cascade Locks is not on this year's agenda. Okay, closing Cascade Locks is not on this year's agenda. I do want to show a real quick graph, or not a graph, but just something that I think is important for us to understand when we talk about changes at Cascade Locks Elementary. So this is their enrollment, okay, that we are projecting for next year. And kindergarten is estimated. We don't know exactly just how many kindergarten students are going to show up. Grade 1, we're looking at 14 students. Grade 2, 12. Grade 3, 15. Grade 4, 9. And grade 5, 9. Okay. Over here to the right in this column is our target class sizes that we have for elementary school. So At each of our elementary schools, we have this target, and it's a ±4, meaning we can go 4 below or we can go 4 above before we either take away a teacher or add a teacher, typically at the beginning of the school year. And you can see that Cascade Locks Elementary's enrollment is below the target in all of the grade levels. The plan for next year is to have kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 be all straight classes, not blends. The only blend that you will see then is at grade 4 and grade 5, which is 18 students. And with that, we are staffing this blend with a 1.5 FTE, okay? And the reason we are doing that is because they will no longer have a math intervention specialist. They will no longer have a reading specialist in order to provide pull-out intervention. Instead, because of the class size of these grade levels, the idea is that the teacher can then provide the interventions in the classroom due to the fact that they have a smaller class size. As many of you know, we have hired a principal/specialist that has both an ESOL certification as well as a reading specialist endorsement, okay? And because of that, that person is going to be able to coordinate what those interventions need to look like, have conversations during our MTSS process in order to ensure that the students are receiving the interventions that they need. The other approach would have been to have gone to blends, like K1 and a 2-3 and a 4-5, and then you have specialists doing pull-out. And we really actually believe that this model is a better model to have your grade level teacher providing the level of interventions. We're talking about the classroom teacher, the most highly trained person in the building, to be able to provide that level of intervention for our students, okay? I know that we've heard about concerns about our student support specialist ratios, and I know that we included that in the FAQ, how that looks. You can see what our enrollment looks like for Cascade Locks Elementary. It's 74 in comparison to May Street, Mid-Valley, Parkdale, and Westside here. So when you are taking a look at, say, a full-time student support specialist at Cascade Locks Elementary, that's a 74-to-1 ratio in comparison to the next largest school is 246-to-1. With a half-time, you're still at 148-to-1 ratio. That's still below the next highest larger school of Parkdale Elementary of 246-to-1. Because of that, we believe our student support specialists can continue to provide support for our students at Cascade Locks Elementary while also fulfilling the responsibility of supporting such as like our special education students and so forth. Okay.
So, Bill, when you talk about 1.5 FTE for the blended class, what does that actually look like? Is that one teacher full-time and
It's a
then somebody
full-time teacher,
helping
and then
out?
you'll have a half-time teacher there, and so like when you're getting into like core instruction, you would then like siphon off the 5th grade class to go with that half-time teacher, so then the other teacher can focus on 4th grade, or same thing with math.
Bill, the SSS ratios were not provided in the FAQ to give us a comparison for compared to other schools. Is
Okay.
that something you all have?
Yeah. Hang on a second, let me dig for you. So, there was a chart, correct, Gus? Yeah, so there was a chart that shows, okay, I'm just gonna display this, Jamie.
It wasn't provided to us.
I'm sorry,
It's posted to the one online.
okay,
Apologize.
yeah. I'll blow this up a little bit. So you can see, here's Cascade Locks Elementary with a 0.5 student support specialist, 148 students to 1 ratio. Mid-Valley Elementary with 2 would be 173.5. Parkdale Elementary, 247. Westside Elementary, 195. May Street Elementary at 217, and then you get into our secondary schools here. So I'm going to keep us moving here. There was a question here. What other variables affect the decision-making on Cascade Locks Elementary School as a viable school in the district? And I think there's a lot of variables, okay? So travel is one. Cascade Locks is a hub of the community, and we need to recognize that. You know, they're 20 miles away, and so it's really important that we do recognize that. The costs of maintenance and upkeep is something that we definitely need to consider, especially as we're going through our long-range facilities planning. And then the student experience. How does that look at Cascade Locks Elementary in comparison to our other students at our 4 other elementary schools? And so those are things that we weigh when we are having, you know, conversations around Cascade Locks. But as I mentioned, there is no plans to close Cascade Locks. Okay. There was a question about what is Plan B for the budget areas facing reductions, and I think I hit that in my initial statement with all of you. So other questions around Cascade Locks that you have?
I had one. Is the student support specialist, is that position going down to half-time, or is that person going to be supplemented with other hours to make a full-time position?
Yeah, so there are, I don't know, Gus, you want to talk about that a little bit as far as where we are in the process?
I mean, yeah, we're working through that now. Ideally, it would be someone there full-time with other duties. We're finalizing details on that.
I guess I had a concern about substitute teacher coverage. So in the budget presentation, Mark mentioned that when there is a substitute teacher shortage, the math intervention specialist is frequently pulled as a substitute.
Yep.
And at Cascade Locks, when you're going down to not having that person there anymore and you have your principal that's now a half-time specialist, how are you going to manage coverage for vacations and illnesses?
Yeah, it's a challenge, and it's just not Cascade Locks. It's like at all schools, it's a challenge to be able to fill the sub shortages that we have. And so it's something that we discuss frequently. We talk about providing incentives, but it is going to be a challenge, Janice. I'm not getting around that with you.
And have you looked
Just
at
gonna
all?
throw in that, like, we visited Mid-Valley a couple weeks ago or whatever. It just happened to be a school board, you know, we do these walks through the school, and there were 14 instructional positions out that day. So 14 subs had to be lined up from, which Kim had somehow managed to do. But yeah, it's a real challenge. We need more subs in the district.
And Janice, it happens everywhere too. You know, if you have kids that are set up for interventions, and the intervention person is not there that day, and there's no sub, those kids just don't get that intervention that day. So it happens at all the elementary schools.
Right, I guess I'm concerned about like the number of adults on the facility property. Just like when you're taking those positions away, at larger schools, there's more support staff that are able to hop in and like, oh, I'm sorry you missed math intervention that day because that person was substituting.
Yep.
But like the reality is if there's only 4 adults in the building, it's like.
I agree, and I think that is something, though, that our HR department, you know, because they are responsible for ensuring that we have coverage at all of our schools. It's something that we need to be mindful of, that Cascade Locks is going to be shorter than the other schools.
Are there any like additional programs that you've looked at relocating to that facility to like help with the operational efficiency?
Yeah,
Like-
so as everyone knows, we have the library that's located at Cascade Locks, and we also had a preschool or a daycare program, preschool daycare program that, you know, is no longer, they weren't able to make it go. But we do have space available there, so if people have an interest, you know, we'd be open to the conversation for sure.
No, I mean, like, I understand the lease spaces that are available, but I mean, like, district level spaces, like, are you looking at, you know, some of the in-person HROA things being held in Cascade Locks, or could we move some offices down there? Like, there's a lot of space that could be used.
Yeah, we haven't really considered moving other programs down to Cascade Locks at this time.
add just a little bit about the substitute piece too. We have seen an increase in the number of folks interested in substituting, so that's been promising. And then we also have a district team, a district spreadsheet of district staff, even administrators who will step in as needed. So it's sort of the backup list, but it exists and we'll use it as needed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna keep us moving. The next topic was transportation and maintenance. So there was a question or a concern. There is a concern about the maintenance of district vehicles. Buses are regularly found with malfunctioning signals or headlights. While employees are working hard, it has been reported that pre-trip protocols are not being followed to ensure compliance. And I just want to be honest with you, I have not heard of this concern until this was shared with me in this message here. And I just want to say that our transportation director, Kyle Roselle, and our driver team prioritize student safety above all else. We take every report of equipment concerns or pre-trip procedures seriously. While the national driver shortage creates operational challenges, we have worked closely with our director to reinforce our rigorous safety protocols, ensuring every vehicle in our fleet meets all compliance and safety standards before it hits the road, okay? With that said, though, this is being communicated to our transportation director to make sure that he is aware of the concern that's being shared here, okay? There was also a statement or a question around budget reallocation. So one suggestion was, could we use the money currently funding the unused routing software to focus on maintenance and training for bus drivers? So we do have a $5,000 software program that is intended to help with routing, developing routes, making adjustments depending on need and what have you. Our current transportation staff prefers to go old school, I would say. And so we are evaluating whether those funds are better served elsewhere. I think probably our biggest challenge at Transportation Department is to really focus on finding more drivers. That's the biggest one. It's a real issue. Today I was walking out of and there was a gentleman that was walking out, ex-Sharon, and there's a bus driver that is looking to not continue to drive as regularly as has been, and every time that happens, that is just going to mean we're pulling our mechanics to drive. We are pulling Kyle Roselle, our transportation director, as well as Cindy Beth, all these people away from their original intent and job, and they are having to drive. And so it's a stress on the system for sure.
Can we talk about, about the fact that we've made an effort to make sure we keep our busing within the district, and that even without, and the reasons for that?
Yeah.
Just to explain maybe some of that.
Busing in the district.
Transportation, us
not
keeping it instead of
contracting.
contracting.
Oh, instead of contracting it out.
Not contracting out,
Okay.
because so many districts now contract their busing.
I actually have a nice chart. The one data point that I have is going back and looking at some of the ODE audit data for districts. And when you look at that function, that 2552, I can't remember. Anyway, function for transportation. It's just like that revenue. When I had all those charts, those lines, and our revenue was at the top, our transportation's at the bottom. And I think several things are going on. I think number one, anybody who does anything for profit is taking profit. However, we've seen it in some districts in how they manage their substitute pools. They outsource it, and they're avoiding the PERS cost, which essentially is, as we know, increasing, and suddenly it's a 36% number. But the amount of money that some of these companies are taking is largely a big chunk of that. They're offering more money in wages as opposed to in pension, things like that. Our district, though, as a whole, and I can say from a comparison on a per student basis, spends less per student on transportation than these other districts. I think that's probably, on one hand, it's a good thing, and on one thing, I think it's symptomatic of the fact that we need to look at our driver pools and we need to look at our mechanics and how we're paying them. And so one of the things we are trying to do actively is to be able to figure out ways to carve out money to help specific groups. Our competition is not other school districts for drivers. Nobody's coming from Bend here to drive a bus. Our competition is all of the other trucking companies and things like that. And so we are looking at that. But some of those things, you got contractual components, you got timing, you got things, I think, is trying to carve out money in the budget to be able to invest in some of those areas and see how that works. It's a long-term issue, but it's something that we definitely have to get to. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. No, I mean, it wasn't really a question. It was more just why we keep it in-house. Yeah.
I will say this, I think as a result of some of that, we've probably been more active in taking advantage of like replacement bus grants and things. In the coming year, we will have replaced 4 of our buses, and our typical fleet is like, our running routes is running like a dozen. That's a pretty significant. I think I looked at numbers. Ben just did a big transportation overhaul, and when you look at it, they were replacing about 33%. It's just they had a lot more buses. We're looking at adding another one next year that'll be an EV bus. We've not, because we haven't gone through a full year, we haven't seen the maintenance savings, both from fuel, but also from things like brakes, from the mechanic side, where you're not having to necessarily worry about diesel motor mechanics. You're worried more about the suspension and brakes and things like that. And so there's a lot of savings that I think we will realize over time through that. And hopefully we'll start to see it and be able to measure it next year.
I just add, Mark's the money guy, he's gonna talk about the savings. There's a real cultural component to it too. We have our community members serving our school and our students, and if you ever get to visit the transportation department, it's like a family, and we really look at that team as a part of our service that we provide to our students, and I think they feel that pride, and so that's really special to our district.
That's good. I'll keep us moving. So the next topic was general fund and reserve strategy. So about the nutrition transfer, is it possible to delay the planned fund transfer to the nutrition department to free up immediate general fund resources? And so the transfer to nutrition services is not optional. It is a structural requirement to unlock $2.5 million in funding. We are actively promoting community fundraising to offset these costs where possible. Mark, you might want to add.
Yeah, 2 years ago, that fund balance in nutrition was about $630,000. It dropped that year because we were forced to, because we couldn't keep a high fund balance according to the rules. And so we dropped it to about $265,000. So far this year, I'm thinking we will end the year at about $60,000 to $100,000 as a fund balance. So we're dropping every year. And that's primarily because the federal contract meal rates are based on a per nationwide average, not on the costs of delivering meals in Oregon, which is more expensive. And so it's my belief that by the end of that year, we'll be required to make the $100,000 fund transfer to keep the fund solvent, essentially, keep it above zero. And I don't want to get surprised by that. We've had that in the past, and some grant funds and things that got upside down, and we can't have negative balances. Looked at it, trying to figure out another way through. Jordan is actively trying to manage her costs. She actually does a really good job when you look at what she provides in terms of locally sourced foods and what it means to many of the students and things like that. But I think there's an inevitability when you're dealing with the costs of service in Oregon relative to the majority of the rest of the country.
There was also a question around, is it possible to delay the planned fund reserve for the turf field replacement? And that's not our recommendation. It's a matter of student safety and protecting a high-use asset that serves thousands of hours of activity. Deferring this now only creates a larger, more expensive crisis later. And I know there's been some questions as to whether or not we can wait until the long-range facilities planning committee, if they decide to go out for a bond, that we use bond funds to be able to cover that. And that's a possibility for sure, but that is a waiting game. And then it also is, you're not sure if you're actually going to pass that bond, because if you don't, then you're stuck with a turf field that may not be usable, that you're going to need to put money into. And so our recommendation is to continue to put money aside for that turf field, so when it is due, that we are ready to replace it. We talked, there was a question about staffing contingency. I think I touched on that in a conversation with you, Corinda. There was a question around utilities. So the proposed 26-27 fuel and natural gas budget appears exactly the same as the current year with one exception. Should we assume available contingency funding is actually less than shown, as a portion will likely be needed for fuel and heating?
So I think there should have been two exceptions. And so one was electrical and one was in fuel. I added about 5.5%. So what I try to do is run utilities as a collective budget group in terms of control, because typically what I've seen in terms of our pattern is years get hotter and colder, and so often you're not heating both ends of the spectrum. And so the roughly 75,000 that I added this year to the 1.2 million was a very intentional number, looking at where we're looking at this year and sort of extrapolating those numbers. No question, costs are going up. We're also hoping that what we'll start to see is some of the benefits of like the Hawaii Solar Microgrid project coming on stream in terms of being able to help that facility's electrical use that's supposed to be commissioned in August. And we'll see where those numbers line out.
When you say,
Go ahead, Janice.
when you say that you're actively promoting community funding for these types of projects, who's in charge of making those asks for like donations? Like how are you doing that?
Yeah, so we do have a website that we can now point people to. I'm just saying, Janice, like that is a location where, and we just updated it recently, and so we can point people to it when people are wanting to make donations.
Okay. But that's not active
Yeah.
solicitation?
Yeah, no, we aren't. Like, that would be something that we would need to put time and effort into in order to be able to do so. I will say, like, supply of budgets is a good example for us to reference. So at the beginning of the year, we do ask for donations to offset our supply budget costs. And I would say the amount of donations is pretty minimal from our families when it comes to those donations.
I would add, Bill, the Education Foundation solicits a lot of money and provides a lot of resources to our school district and our students.
And we did have 2 years ago, we had a student that was trying to encourage people to actually pay into a fund to offset the meals that weren't paid for students at our high school. And he created a fantastic fundraiser. He got a lot of the restaurants involved, and it was fantastic, but it was nowhere close to what we ended up needing. It's a lot of money. So, but there have been, great things like that happen from our community members, even our students.
So what would it look like for us to get a person who was in charge of making requests like that? Like if we were to reallocate like the turf allocation into either a fundraising consultant or a fundraiser to be making those active requests and those grants applications?
It would be an investment, putting money instead of, say, turf field replacement into a person that would then be responsible for collecting donations.
I think you'd see a good return on that though, like maybe a better return than on turf.
And I would say, I will speak up for the turf. I don't know that anyone understands how much that field is used. And if it does not meet a safety standard, and that can happen, nobody gets to use that field. And that's saying to a heck of a lot of students, community members, everybody, no more. And that's, for me, a really, really scary thing, because I know just by being involved, by being a parent, by being a community member, how important activities are to students. That it's a really big deal, and it keeps students in school. The possibility of playing on a team keeps kids coming to high school. It keeps kids' grades up. I know that's being kept track of. Like if you don't make grades, you don't get to play, and that keeps students keeping grades. And so, I know that a lot of times our athletic fields or those kind of things are they seem like easy places to make cuts, but for me, I very much appreciate our athletic fields as part of our education for our kids and part of our support for our kids and community. I mean, that field is used not 24 hours a day, but close.
Right, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have those facilities and those resources available. I'm just, if we had someone out doing solicitations for sponsorships, for donations, I think that those are the kind of things that the community would show up to support in a financial way, but you have to ask people to donate money actively. It can't just go out in an email like the fourth thing down.
Yeah.
I mean, and like looking at the facility rental thing, like, are we able to like index maintenance to that in the long-range facility planning? Like indexing the rates to the maintenance? Because a lot of these rates are very reasonable. And if it's really being used, 24 hours a day, there's a possibility to be sustaining it with some of those rates, right?
You mean like increasing the rates in order to be able to put it back?
Yes.
So I'll take you back to, so we meet quarterly with Parks and Rec and the Youth League Alliance. And last spring, we shared that we were proposing an increase in our facility rentals. And it was a sizable, it was more comparable to what you would see probably in the Portland area school districts. And we received a significant pushback from our youth leagues about those charges, saying that it is going to drive costs up, that they aren't going to be able to provide as many opportunities for our students because of those costs. Not as many kids will participate because the costs will be up. And so there was a lot of pushback, and as a result, we didn't move it forward. We said we'll keep the rates as they are. For this school year, we are adjusting those rates, but it's more of like a rate of a cost for inflation rather than a significant increase, just based on what we are hearing. And I'll also add that our community supports our school district with a bond and a levy. Like 2016, they passed the bond. They've passed a levy multiple times, and I do believe there is a sense that when those are passed by our community, there is a belief that there is, it's a word I want to use, like they get to use the facilities, and I think they have a right to. They are paying for them, and so we are going to provide that opportunity. I think we all recognize in our school district and our community that there aren't a ton of parks around here, that our schools are our parks, and so we do want our kids on our playgrounds, we want them on the fields, we want them in the gyms. And so we don't want it to be, a cost that is prohibitive for our students.
I love the turf field. I am a big proponent of, putting our money into more like academic areas when we can. And I very much understand how important athletics is to our whole district and to our community, and that field really does service the entire community. I think my part when I brought this up initially was just that we are not going to do that again this year. Mm-hmm. We're putting away money for the future for that turf field. Yeah. At that time, and so when we're looking at cuts being made here, I guess that was my thought process is, do we really want to put money away for that, along with all the other money we're kind of putting away and kind of saving when we are making cuts to kind of actual academics and student services. Yeah. So that was mine. I actually am in agreement. I do think people love that field so much that there would be an opportunity for us to get help from our community too. In the future, I have a little more faith than they would do that over student supplies. Mm-hmm. But because they really love that field. I understand that that's not a thing necessarily that we can talk about. I guess write in this budget today, but yeah. My issue is that I hate when we put away money for those things and then take away actual support.
We have had conversations about hiring a grant writer. And, you know, would we get the benefit, you know, over the cost and what have you? We know that grants are more, they're a little bit tighter, especially from the federal level, than private at this point in time. But it is something, it's a consideration that we've had. Yeah, we do rely on, so we have a couple of people, Paul Lindbergh and Claire Rawson, that they are funded by Providence as well as the Next Door in our community in order to be able to write grants. And so long as we can make a connection with a grant to a community partner, then we can actually enlist their support for free on writing those grants. And they're amazing. Like, they are so good at what they do. And so, you know, it's every month we're probably having a conversation with Paul and Claire about a grant and putting an application together. So we do that work. I guess the question is whether or not we would actually, you know, with the investment, get the return that we are looking for with doing that for a person that's just solely that.
And I do appreciate how much our staff, administrative staff, I mean, I don't know that everyone knows how many grants we go out for and actually are able to obtain a lot because of the huge work of our administrative staff and our community partners. I guess for me, I just want to think about that in the future if we can find, again, however we do that, grants or just really asking our community to step up so that we, you know, don't necessarily have to use those funds for that. Because really the levy is for staffing, right? Like, that was what the levy is for. It is to make sure that we're like keeping kids in the classroom with adequate parts. And so I always hate to kind of take that back when we're thinking about turf, but.
Yep.
So, well, I don't know that we're using the levy for the turf per se.
Oh,
mean,
no,
don't know.
No, I know we're not. I'm not saying
Okay,
that.
well, so I just
I'm
wanted to
not-
clarify.
I certainly did not
I just
mean
wanted to
that.
also clarify that, like, my understanding is this turf maintenance, replacement, whatever it is, I mean, that's a scheduled, we knew about that in 2016 when the field got put in. It would have been great if over various administrations and whatnot over the years, it seems like we could have put away, I don't know what the math is, sorry, but $60K a year, I don't, you know, $50K a year, and we'd be there, right? And because we're coming up on the deadline, and the thing is, we had one of our long-range facility planning meetings, and sorry, I can't remember, this probably already got covered, but, you know, Sean Miley was there and explained that there's basically over half of our high school student population is in some athletics. Doesn't mean they're all out on the turf field, but yeah, athletics are a big deal there for the whole student population. But once we hit this deadline that I think is coming up in a year or two for the maintenance, that field gets tested every year. If it fails the test, we can't insure it. So like the thing's just dead in the water. And if we manage to damage it, because we're at a high usage rate, higher than might be average for turf fields at other schools. If we damage a thing, then the cost goes up a lot, or does need a true actual replacement. So I guess I want to make sure I'm.
Yeah, it's just not an
correct.
impact test. It's
That's
also
what I
the
understood.
seams that come ripped, you know, that become ripped and you have to sew them back together. There's a lot of factors involved. And again, with a high usage rate, you're going to have those things.
But maybe going forward, we could start to have I don't know what the number
Yeah.
is, but a $50K a year set
Right.
aside, so we're ready in 10 years from now.
There are procurement strategies. I would not say if, but when we get the funds with a bond or something, and we purchase field turf, similar to a house, you can buy extended warranties and ways of financing that using one-time funds that we should avail ourselves of. And yes, it would have been much easier if when we purchased the field turf, we recognized that it was going to be a $50,000 or $60,000 a year liability for the next 10 years. You know, as we talked about, it's an 8 to 10 year horizon. Our field turf gets a lot more use than the normal. I think it was a year and a half ago, we repaired 19 seams on it. If you look at the field today, and I'm not a field turf expert, but sometimes the engineer in me thinks it's really smart, but you see the seams. And So you can chart the data on the GMAX tests. I did that. I think that's one concern. And of course, the problem is it jumps because as all the underlayment washes out, then it typically in the later years takes a 20 or 30 point jump, and you don't know when that's going to be. But if you look at it and you see the seams, like if you just kind of look at the field, you can really see the seams coming apart. And that's a bigger concern. Somebody can catch a cleat or do something. And so I think I've struggled with this one too. And I think sometimes, well, what's the harm of putting out a year? I'm concerned because right now we got to get through next year, and then we got another third, then we got to go procure it, then we got to go install it, and because it's used so much, we have to pick a time. Like, we may be very well 4 years out before that's replaced, even with the strategy we have today, and that has me concerned. Then that's where I stand on it.
So there was one more, and that was student programming, so athletics. Middle school sports are on the chopping block every year, and youth programming through Hood River Parks and Rec may cease to exist as well. Is there a long-term sustainability plan for these areas? Is there a roadmap for this? And so, I want to say that these programs are important for equity and student engagement. While we provide facilities for free or at a discounted rate to local youth sports, the long-term roadmap depends heavily on the success of the upcoming Parks and Rec bond and levy. That's why our school board actually passed a letter of support in favor of this bond and levy. So we are hopeful that that thing passes. If it doesn't, it's going to create, issues with sports and extracurricular activities for students, as well as, I would say, for like adult youth leagues and what have you. But we will continue to work with our Youth League Alliance in order to be able to provide, as much level of extracurricular activities in our school district, but we are hopeful.
So I do have a question with regard to levies in general. I happened to look at the county map earlier this week, and the assessed value for homes seems pretty arbitrary, and in many times very outdated, especially when you look at it compared to the actual, value of the home. If they were, if people were to sell their home, the assessed value might show 200,000, but you look at Zillow and the home is, valued at close to $1 million. How often does that get looked at and reevaluated to potentially facilitate an increase in the revenue that we would get from a levy?
I would say you need to speak to Brian Beebe about that. It's super complicated and really, you get in the weeds really quick.
Yeah, okay. I was just curious.
Oregon has some statewide limitations on that as well with Measure 5 and Measure 50. So it's indexed to 1997?
1997.
Okay.
There's a lot wrong with that whole system.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the kickback too. Let's go.
Let's put it all on.
Well, and we don't even collect all the levy either, right? Even if, we don't even collect the true.
Like 14% compression loss or something, right?
There's, because of the, what is it?
Compression.
Compression. Yeah, we don't even get, even on the assessed value that is way less than the actual value. We don't even collect that because of Oregon statutes.
The county they did just hire another assessor in their last budget cycle, and this year they're asking for another to get on a 6-year schedule to reassess homes, which will allow assessed values then to creep closer to market values.
Yeah, okay.
But it's
Yeah.
But isn't there like a 3 or 4% limit per year that it can go
That's
up or
correct,
something?
yeah.
And again, this is all
Through an
Measure
exception
50,
year.
51 things.
If anyone wants to talk about this after the meeting, I'm happy to stick around.
We can solve all your problems right here, Matt, tonight.
I mean, along the same line of thinking of the budget, though, like, if you're looking at hiring grant writers, you could also be looking at hiring lobbyists to make those changes.
Well, that, I mean, one of the reasons that we, so Oregon School Boards Association, that is one of the reasons that we are a member of them, because they actually have lobbyists that do that for us. And, you know, all of us have regional representatives. I just happen to be yours. So, you know, we are lobbying for things like that every year, all the time. And that's a benefit that we get from being a member of OSBA, so that we hopefully don't have to do that.
There is also the Coalition of School Administrators, COSA. They too have 2 lobbyists that are active throughout the year. Yeah, but for example, 2 weeks ago, there was a meeting of superintendents with COSA just to start having conversations about what is it that we need to be focusing on for the next legislative session, so. Yep.
And was Measure 5 and Measure 50 on that list, just being nosy?
It's always a concern, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Are there additional questions or comments from the Budget Committee?
I do have an additional comment, I guess, and I think it might have been covered in one of the emails you put out, sort of midweek mark, but on page 44 of the budget, where it goes over kind of, it's talking about general fund and by object, and it goes through licensed, classified, and administrative positions. And it seems like the proposed FTE for 25-26 and the proposed FTE for 26-27, those don't seem to jive with what's actually happening. It seems like there's sometimes more cuts here or there. And from my side, you know, it's like I see in the license, you know, like licensed salaries is going down by, you know, a little over 1.5 or around 1.5 FTE, and classified's going down by about 3. But even with the cut at Cascade Locks, it's showing administrative FTE like going up 0.5.
Correct.
So I'm just wondering how those numbers jive with you know.
Let me take those in reverse order. So that's your second question about the administrator. I think in our FAQ, I answered that because I think some eagle-eyed person, was it Sarah? I don't remember who it was. Somebody asked that question. Candidly there last year, when we put the 25-26 budget together, I included the cost of administrator and left out the FTE when I did the calculation. If you recall, in January, we were converting financial software system, and of course, we start this in January, and some of the data that got populated in wasn't quite the best and had to be cleaned up. But several big things go on, and this is a struggle that I have. As I've mentioned, I'm committed to making our budget document more useful for people than what it's been in the past. One of the things is that the general fund is the piece that we always tend to look at. But when we look at how grants have funded over the years, you see this when you look at 10-year swaths of personnel and things like that, the amount of grant funding has increased quite considerably. And so as we shuffle people between grants, depending on what's going on, like SIA, High School Success in particular, it changes those numbers, and it is hard to track.
Okay.
I've thought about trying to do it globally. That was why in the book, when you look at the FTE kind of calculation for student ratios, I switched this year and said, let me add SIA and High School Success because it's such a big component. And honestly, budgetarily wise, we kind of treat it sometimes like a general fund because we know we can move people back and forth based on what the objectives of the grant are. And so that changes, which makes it difficult to track. The other problem is we have a staffing contingency, so we add personnel. Those don't show. I thought about adding this year and just putting current FTE as a column and then showing the change, which might have been clear. Maybe next year we'll do that. I think what I have to just say is from a budgetary, what we're presenting, transparency standpoint, the changes you see in the narratives are the absolute programmatic changes that we're looking at. And if there's nothing, not trying to hide anything in there or show something, and so things are shuffling around underneath with the grants and changes that go on at the start of the year and things like that. And so it just makes it hard. And so I think based on the fact that you're asking and somebody else picked up on it, next year we'll look at trying to figure out another way to do it to make it clear.
Yeah, I would say overall that this budget has been the easiest to understand of any budget that I've gone through in the past 10 years. So kudos to you for putting together a document that's relatively easy to muddle through.
Yeah.
Could someone explain to me a little bit more clearly the principal, sorry, where is it exactly? Office of the principal. It's just like a really sort of large chunky budget with 32 FTEs, just not really sure
That
what that is.
function, and there's a description somewhere in there. There's a description at the top of at the front of that section. But it essentially contains all of the school-related principals, vice principals, their clerical staff, and for the most part, a significant portion of their discretionary budgets. And so it's a pretty important function, but it's almost entirely, in fact, I think it's all entirely at schools.
Okay.
I think that's another area that's been a question, is how to bracket things between student-facing, non-student-facing. What does support services mean? What is this? I think that's something we'll work on for next year. I think that's an area we need to look at as a district, and we'll look at that, and we'll figure out a way to clarify that a little bit better.
Thank you.
I guess I have a couple comments, sort of. One about Cascade Locks and the table that you had up there before, and it was, I think we were estimating 74 students for next year, which I believe is an increase from this year, several. But that's moving in a good direction. I was happy to see that for CL. And, you know, we have an avid showcase school there, and I know we're all proud of that, and I really believe we can continue that. And, I just wanted to recognize that, I guess. But, and then also, I had a whole statement. I'm not going to drag us through it all, but, you know, we started to talk about Measure 51 and 50 and 51, which also ties into the kicker. And that's why we're here every year or two. I mean, I've been doing this for 8 or 10 years now, and we, more often than not, are sitting here this time of year doing a budget cut. And it's because PERS, which is great, you know, I'm glad we have a retirement system, but there's no state plan of how the heck to fund that other than throw it out to schools and whoever's stuck dealing with the latest investment that didn't work out the way it was supposed to. There's our SPED cap, which I'm so proud of the people who work so hard on our SPED systems here, and that we can offer those services. But the state puts this artificial 11% cap on that. And there's over $1 million shortfall for us this year in terms of what we're spending versus what the state puts in. And if you go right across the river in Washington, there's 100% full funding. And we've lobbied for that and tried to get it changed, and there's nothing. And so it's just, I don't know if it's frustrating or I just end up circling back and maybe getting tired of, like, and everybody in this room cares. That's why you're here about, you know, and so it's a tough deal. But Measure 51, 50, the kicker, the stuff, you know, that some of these legislative priorities that, like, you're going to do these services, but we're not really going to pay for it from the state. It's really hard to have a growth budget, to have more programs, to do the things we really want to do. And so I don't know, for my part, I just appreciate people showing up and caring, but man, it's a tough uphill battle.
I just want to say thanks for kind of coming and talking about all of the questions we had before. And I always come back to the fact that we do these budgets, but that it is a moving document, and that you know, it doesn't always come out exactly as we budgeted with it, right? And so I think, I guess I want us to focus on the fact that with all of the things we've talked about, we really do have the best intention for making sure that we're communicating with our community and everybody's feeling comfortable, not happy by any means with a cuts budget or with all of the decisions that we have to make. But that we really have discussed them and that we're going to try to keep those lines of communication open. I hope everybody heard that our administrative staff and really do want that. Like, that is what we want to make sure we're servicing all of our students the best we possibly can. And that with Pine Grove specifically, that that's not gonna be like, there is a process that will happen. And just because we're budgeting it doesn't mean that the process still won't happen. So.
I'll make a motion if there's no more questions. I'm going to move that the Budget Committee of Hood River County School District approve the proposed budget for the 2026-2027 fiscal year in the amount of $101,591,761.
I'll second it.
Is there any additional discussion? All right, hearing none. If you are in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye, or if you are against the motion, please signify by saying no. Matt?
Aye.
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 Okay, so hearing all ayes, the vote was carried by the motion? That passed. Sorry. And then there was another motion, right, for the levy?
So I'll move that the Budget Committee of Hood River County School District approve the permanent tax rate of 4.8119 per $1,000 assessed value, and the local option levy operating tax rate of $1.25, which is the limit, per $1,000 of assessed value for general fund operations, and in the amount of $5,037,060 for the general obligation bond levy.
I can second that.
Second roll.
Is there any additional discussion? All right, hearing none. If you are in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye, or if you are against the motion, please signify by saying no.
Aye.
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 All right, that motion carries. At this time, I would like to thank our engaged public audience and the members of the Volunteer Budget Committee for their careful attention and deliberation to matters of financial importance to the school district. With that, this committee's work is complete, and this approved budget will move on to the school board for consideration. This meeting is adjourned.
Janice, can I say one more thing before you adjourn? Sorry.
Okay.
I do want to just one more time thank everybody for, this is a really, it's a hard process when there are budget cuts, and unfortunately, that is the state that we're in. I do really want to thank people from our community for speaking up for what you believe in. We do listen. It does make a difference. I mean, you can see this budget committee really took to heart the questions that were asked. And so thank you, and continue to do that. That's, you care the most about what you care about, and unfortunately, or fortunately, the staff and the board and this committee has to look at a much broader view. So we do need to hear what people care about, and we did loud and clear. But we also have to look at a budget that is overarching and really takes into consideration all things. And I want to commend this team, and Mark and Bill especially, but everybody for really I think this budget was written so well. I do think that, you know, it is a really hard task to look at everything that we need to do for our students, our families, our staff, our community, everything that we deal with, and coming up with a budget is really difficult. And this one, I really agree with Ted, like, I've not ever been able to understand a budget as well as this, and I've been doing this a long time too. So I just wanted to say gratitude to everybody involved, everybody who came to speak, all the letters we got, and you all for all the work that you've done. So thank you for letting me say that.
Okay, anything else for the good of the order?
All right.
This meeting is adjourned.
More gusto than that.
It was the good of the order.